The alarm systems on the horizon's edge screamed through every corridor. Captain Jake Morrison jumped from his chair and ran to the main control panel. His fingers moved quickly across the screen as he tried to find the source of the signal. Something was sending out a distress call from the nearby moon, and it was weak, like whatever was calling for help didn't have much time left. Jake looked at his crew. Lieutenant Kate Bennett stood ready at her station, her brown eyes focused and alert. The rest of the team waited for his orders. They were deep in the Dracon system, a place where few humans dared to travel. This was dragon territory, and dragons didn't like visitors. "Take us down to the surface," Jake ordered. His gut told him something was very wrong down there. The ship descended through thick clouds of red and orange gas. When they broke through, the sight below made Jake's heart sink. The ground was covered in ash and burnt metal. In the center of the destruction lay the remains of what must have been an enormous nest. The structure was at least 50 feet wide, made from twisted metal and crystallized rock. Now it was nothing but smoking ruins. "Captain, I'm picking up weapon signatures," Kate said quietly. "Plasma cannons. Military grade." This was an attack. Jake felt anger rise in his chest. Everyone in the galaxy knew about the poachers who hunted rare species for profit. Dragon scales, bones, and eggs sold for millions on the black market. But attacking a nest was a new low even for criminals. "Suits on," Jake commanded. "We're going down there." His second officer, Lieutenant Danny Cole, grabbed his arm. "Sir, with respect, this is a bad idea. If there are adult dragons nearby and they see us here, they'll think we did this. They'll kill us before we can explain." Jake pulled his arm free. "I know the risks, but if there's anyone alive down there, we have to help." They landed the ship a safe distance from the ruins. Jake, Kate, and 2 security officers walked carefully through the debris. The destruction was total. Burn marks covered everything. Pieces of eggshells lay scattered across the ground, each one as big as a human torso. Jake counted at least 12 destroyed eggs. Then he heard it. A tiny sound almost like a bird chirping. He froze and held up his hand to stop the others. The sound came again, weak and desperate. Jake ran toward the noise, jumping over chunks of melted metal. Behind a fallen piece of the nest wall, he found them. 2 small creatures huddled together in a shallow hole. They were no bigger than house cats, covered in scales that should have been shining, but were dull with ash and blood. "Baby dragons." "Oh no," Kate whispered beside him. "They're so young." The hatchlings looked up at Jake with eyes that seemed too aware, too intelligent for newborns. One had scales that wanted to be red but were covered in soot. The other was darker, almost black. Both were covered in deep cuts that oozed a golden fluid, dragon blood. Jake knelt down slowly. He knew this was dangerous. Even baby dragons could breathe fire, and their bites were venomous. But these 2 weren't attacking. They were dying. "We can't leave them," Jake said softly. He took off his thermal jacket and carefully wrapped it around both hatchlings. They were so light, so fragile. They chirped again and pressed against his chest, seeking warmth. "Captain, we need to go now," the security officer urged. "If adult dragons come back and find us with their young, they won't listen to explanations." Jake stood up, cradling the injured hatchlings. "Then we better move fast. Kate, get the medical bay ready. These 2 need help immediately." The journey back to the ship felt like it took forever. Every second, Jake expected to see massive wings in the sky or hear the roar of an angry dragon parent. But nothing came. The sky remained empty and silent. Whatever happened here, the adult dragons were gone. Dead or captured, Jake didn't want to think about it. On the ship, Kate worked quickly to treat the hatchlings. She had never treated a dragon before, but the basic principles were the same. Clean the wounds, stop the bleeding, provide fluids and warmth. Jake refused to leave the medical bay. He held the smaller dragon, the red one, while Kate worked on the darker one. "Their heartbeats are getting stronger," Kate said after an hour. "I think they'll make it. But Jake, we need to contact the Galactic Council. There are protocols for this. Dragons are a protected species." "I know," Jake replied. But he didn't move to make the call. That's when it happened. Both hatchlings opened their eyes at the same time. They looked directly at Jake, and something passed between them. It felt like electricity in the air, like the moment before lightning strikes. The red dragon made a small sound and crawled up Jake's arm to his shoulder. The black one wiggled free from Kate's hands and climbed up his other side. "Well, that's new," Kate said with wide eyes. "Dragons don't usually bond with other species." Actually, they never bond with other species. Jake felt the tiny claws gripping his uniform shirt. The hatchlings pressed their small heads against his neck, one on each side. They were purring, a sound like rocks tumbling in a stream. Danny entered the medical bay and stopped in his tracks. "Captain, the Galactic Council is demanding we report any unusual findings in the system. They've heard about attacks on dragon nests. They want to know if we found anything." Jake looked at the two small lives depending on him. He thought about the destroyed nest, the murdered eggs, and the empty sky where parents should have been. He thought about the Council's bureaucracy and the months it would take them to decide what to do. By then, these hatchlings might be dead or sold to the highest bidder. "Tell them we found evidence of poacher activity but no survivors," Jake said firmly. Kate gasped. "Jake, that's against regulations. These dragons need to be reported." "These dragons need to survive," Jake corrected her, "and I'm going to make sure they do." "Danny, set course for the outer colonies. We need somewhere quiet to figure this out." The red hatchling chirped and licked Jake's cheek with a tiny forked tongue. The black one did the same on the other side. Despite everything, Jake smiled. He had just made a decision that could end his career and maybe get him arrested, but looking at these two innocent creatures who had lost everything, he knew it was the right choice. "You two need names," Jake said softly. "How about Ember for you?" He touched the red dragon's snout. "And Ash for you." He gently scratched the black dragon's head. Both hatchlings chirped happily and snuggled closer. In that moment, Jake Morrison became more than a ship captain. He became a father. 3 months had passed since Jake found Ember and Ash. The tiny hatchlings that fit in his jacket were now the size of large dogs. Ember's scales had cleaned up into a brilliant crimson red that seemed to glow with inner fire. Ash's scales were so dark they looked like polished midnight, and sometimes he seemed to blend into the shadows of the ship. But size wasn't the only thing that had changed. The dragons followed Jake everywhere. When he ate breakfast in the mess hall, they sat on either side of his chair, watching every bite he took. When he worked on the bridge, they curled up under his command station. At night, they refused to sleep anywhere except his quarters, taking up most of his bed while he squeezed into whatever space was left. The crew had found it cute at first. Now it was becoming a serious problem. "Captain, we need to talk," Kate said one morning. She looked tired. They all looked tired. "Amber set fire to 3 storage containers yesterday because a crew member walked too close to you. Ash keeps disappearing into the ventilation system and scaring people half to death when he pops out." "This can't continue." Jake sighed and rubbed his face. Ember was sitting on his feet under the table, and he could feel the warmth radiating from her body. Ash was somewhere in the shadows of the room, invisible but definitely present. "I know. I've tried talking to them, but they don't understand why they can't be with me all the time." "That's because you imprinted on them," said a new voice. Dr. Paul Chen, the ship's expert on alien species, walked into the room carrying several data tablets. "I've been researching dragon behavior. When dragons hatch, they bond with the first beings they see. Usually that's their parents. But in this case, you were the first thing they saw after their trauma. In their minds, you're not just their rescuer. You're their father." Jake felt Ember press harder against his legs as if she understood what Paul was saying and wanted to confirm it. "So what do I do?" Jake asked. "I can't be a dragon parent. I'm human. I don't know how to teach them dragon things." "That's the problem," Paul said, spreading his data across the table. "Dragons are supposed to be independent, fierce hunters. They're supposed to learn from their parents how to fly, how to use their fire or shadow powers, how to be dragons. But Ember and Ash are learning human behaviors instead. They're protective like guard dogs. They follow commands. They even seem to understand human speech." As if to prove his point, Ash materialized from the shadows behind Jake's chair. The dragon placed his large head on Jake's shoulder and made a deep rumbling sound that was almost like a purr. "See?" Paul said. "That's not normal dragon behavior. Adult dragons are solitary. They don't purr or seek constant physical contact." Before Jake could respond, the ship's alarm sounded. Danny's voice came over the communication system, urgent and scared. "Captain, to the bridge immediately. We have company and they don't look friendly." Jake ran to the bridge with both dragons galloping behind him. When he arrived, the main screen showed a massive station floating in space ahead of them. Sanctuary Station was one of the largest trading posts in this sector, and it was supposed to be neutral territory. But surrounding the station were 5 ships bearing the mark of the Galactic Council. And next to them were 3 enormous shapes that made Jake's blood run cold. Adult dragons, each one the size of a small building, their scales glittering in the starlight. They've been waiting for us, Kate said quietly. Someone must have reported Ember and Ash. A communication request flashed on the screen. Jake accepted it, and the face of a council representative appeared. Behind her stood several tall, elegant beings in robes. But what caught Jake's attention were the 3 dragons visible through the window behind them. Even on the screen, they radiated power and ancient wisdom. Captain Morrison, the representative said coldly, you have in your possession 2 dragon hatchlings that were reported missing from a destroyed nest in the Draken system. The dragon elders have come to claim them. You will hand them over immediately. Ember and Ash pressed against Jake's legs, one on each side. He could feel them trembling. These dragons are under my protection, Jake said, trying to keep his voice steady. One of the robed figures stepped forward. When he spoke, his voice seemed to echo from everywhere at once. We are the dragon elders, human. Those hatchlings are the last survivors of the Silver Flame clan. They belong with their own kind, learning the ways of dragons. You have no right to keep them. I saved their lives, Jake said, his voice rising. When I found them, they were dying in the ruins of their nest. Where were you then? The elder's eyes flashed with pain and anger. We were fighting the poachers who destroyed 12 nests across 3 systems. Many of our kind died in those battles. We could not be everywhere at once. But we are here now, and we will take our young home. Jake felt Ember's claws dig into his leg. Not hard enough to hurt, but enough to show she was scared. Ash had wrapped his tail around Jake's ankle. They don't want to go with you, Jake said. Can't you see that? What they want is irrelevant, another elder said. They are children who do not understand what is best for them. They must learn dragon culture, dragon history, and dragon power. Only we can teach them these things. Kate touched Jake's arm and whispered, maybe they're right. Maybe Ember and Ash would be better off with their own kind. Jake looked down at the 2 dragons pressed against him. They were staring up at him with those intelligent eyes full of trust and fear. They had already lost their birth parents, their nest, and their entire family. Now strangers wanted to take them away from the only security they had left. I won't force them to go, Jake said firmly, but I won't keep them if it's truly better for them. Let the elders come aboard. Let Ember and Ash meet them. If the dragons want to go, I'll let them, but it has to be their choice. The council representative looked like she wanted to argue, but one of the elders raised a hand to stop her. Very well, human. We will come to your ship. But know this. If those hatchlings have been corrupted, if they can no longer be proper dragons, the responsibility falls on you. The communication ended. Jake knelt down between Ember and Ash, putting an arm around each of them. Listen to me, he said softly. Some very important dragons are coming to meet you. They want to teach you about where you came from and who you are. I think you should listen to them. Maybe even go with them if that's what you want. Ember made a distressed sound and pressed her snout against Jake's chest. Ash wrapped around his shoulders like a scarf, despite being far too big for that now. I know you're scared, Jake continued. But I'm not abandoning you. I'm trying to do what's best for you. You're dragons. You should know about dragon things. An hour later, 3 dragon elders materialized on the ship's landing bay. They were enormous, barely fitting in the large space. Their scales were ancient and scarred, showing countless battles and centuries of life. When they moved, the air itself seemed to bend around them. Jake walked into the bay with Ember and Ash. The moment the hatchlings saw the elders, they froze. Then, instead of running forward to greet their own kind, they did something that shocked everyone present. They moved in front of Jake, placing themselves between him and the elders. Ember's scales began to glow with heat and small flames flickered around her mouth. Ash seemed to sink into the shadows on the floor, his form becoming harder to see clearly. The elders stared in disbelief. Impossible, one of them breathed. They see us as a threat. They're protecting the human. The oldest elder, whose scales were almost white with age, stepped forward slowly. Little ones, he said in a voice like distant thunder. We are your people. We mean you no harm, Ember growled, a sound that no 3-month-old dragon should be able to make. Ash's eyes glowed with an eerie light from within the shadows. The elder looked at Jake. What have you done to them? I saved them, fed them, and kept them safe, Jake said. That's all. That's not all, the elder replied. You've made them love you more than they love their own kind. You've made them think they're human instead of dragon. Jake felt those words like a punch to the gut. Had he done something wrong? Had he ruined these 2 beautiful creatures by trying to help them? The elder must have seen the doubt on Jake's face. His expression softened slightly. Perhaps this is not entirely your fault. The trauma they experienced was severe, and dragon hatchlings bond strongly with whoever saves them. But this bond cannot continue. They will grow to be as large as ships, with power to destroy cities. They need discipline and training that only dragons can provide. Then train them, Jake said. But let me stay with them. Let me be part of their lives. The elders looked at each other. Finally, the oldest one spoke. There is a precedent, though it has not been used in 1,000 years. The trials of the Guardian. If you can pass these trials, we will accept you as their true parent regardless of species. But be warned, human. The trials were designed for dragons. Most who attempt them die. Jake didn't hesitate. When do we start? Ember and Ash chirped in unison, pressing against him. Whatever was coming, they would face it together. At least that's what Jake hoped. The training began the next morning. The dragon elders had agreed to teach Ember and Ash about their heritage, while Jake prepared for the trials. The Horizon's Edge remained docked at Sanctuary Station, and every day the young dragons spent 6 hours learning from the elders. Jake watched through the observation window as Ember practiced controlling her fire. She could now create flames hot enough to melt steel, but controlling that power was difficult. The elder teaching her, whose name was Skyfire, was patient but firm. When Ember got frustrated and wanted to run back to Jake, Skyfire blocked her path. "You are dragon," Skyfire said in her booming voice. "Dragons do not run from difficulty. We face it with courage." In another part of the training area, Ash was learning to use his shadow abilities. His teacher, an ancient dragon named Nightwing, could become completely invisible. He was teaching Ash how to move through shadows like they were doorways, appearing in one place and vanishing to another. Jake was proud of how quickly they were learning, but it hurt to see them spending so much time away from him. He knew it was necessary, but that didn't make it easier. His own training was even harder. The trials wouldn't begin for another 3 weeks, but the elders insisted he prepare. They put him through physical exercises that pushed his human body to its limits. He ran for miles, climbed walls, and practiced combat moves until his muscles screamed in protest. Kate found him one evening, collapsed in the ship's gym, barely able to move. "You're going to kill yourself," she said, offering him water. "Better than failing the trials and losing Ember and Ash," Jake replied, gulping down the drink. "Jake, have you considered that maybe you're not supposed to pass? Maybe this is the elders' way of proving you can't be a dragon parent." Jake wiped sweat from his face. "Then I'll prove them wrong." The peaceful training period ended abruptly 4 weeks later. Jake was in his quarters trying to sleep before the trials began the next day, when every alarm on the ship started blaring at once. He ran to the bridge in his sleep clothes, his heart pounding. Danny was already there, his face pale. "3 ships just dropped out of hyperspace," Danny said. "They're broadcasting pirate codes, but their weapons are military grade." "Captain, I think they're the poachers, the ones who destroyed the dragon nests." Jake felt ice in his veins. "Battle stations. Get everyone to safety." "Where are Ember and Ash?" "In the training bay with the elders," Kate replied, running system checks. The first blast hit their shields before Jake could give another order. The ship rocked violently, throwing people to the floor. The lights flickered and died, replaced by emergency red lighting. "Shields down to 60%, Danny shouted. "These weapons are too strong. We're a science vessel, not a warship. We can't take this kind of punishment." Another blast hit them, and Jake heard the screaming of metal being torn apart. A section of the outer hull had been breached. "They're launching boarding pods," Kate said, her voice shaking. "They're coming inside the ship." Jake grabbed a weapon from the emergency locker. Around him, the crew was arming themselves, but they were scientists and explorers, not soldiers. They would be slaughtered. The first group of pirates blasted through a sealed door on Deck 3. Jake heard the gunfire echoing through the ship's communication system. Then he heard something else, a roar that shook the entire vessel. Ember and Ash had heard the battle and were coming. Jake ran toward the fighting, knowing he needed to coordinate the defense. But what he found when he reached Deck 3 made him stop in his tracks. The corridor was on fire. Not out of control flames, but a wall of heat that blocked the pirates from advancing. In the center of that inferno stood Ember, grown to the size of a small car, her scales glowing like molten metal. She was incinerating anyone who tried to get past her. Behind the pirates, shadows moved impossibly. Men screamed as dark tendrils wrapped around them and dragged them into patches of darkness that shouldn't exist. Ash had learned his lessons well. He was using his shadow powers to terrify and disable the enemies. Fall back, Jake heard one of the pirates yell. Nobody said anything about fighting dragons, but it was too late for them to retreat. The dragon elders had arrived, and they were furious. 3 massive forms came crashing through the walls of the ship, not caring about the damage. Skyfire breathed a jet of flame so hot it turned the pirates' weapons to liquid metal. Nightwing became a living nightmare, appearing and disappearing, each time leaving another enemy unconscious or worse. Jake ran to where his crew was pinned down by gunfire. Lieutenant Bennett was on the ground, bleeding from a wound in her shoulder. She had thrown herself in front of another crew member to protect them. "Kate!" Jake yelled, sliding to her side. The gunfire was all around them, bullets sparking off the metal walls. "I'm okay," she gasped, but her face was white with pain. "Help the others." Ember must have sensed Jake was in danger. She abandoned her position blocking the corridor and came running, her claws scraping on the metal floor. When she saw Kate bleeding and Jake exposed to enemy fire, something changed in her eyes. The young dragon opened her mouth, and a stream of fire erupted that was twice as powerful as anything she had produced before. The heat was so intense that it started melting through the ship's walls. The pirates in that section simply vaporized. "Ember, no!" Jake shouted. "You'll destroy the ship." But Ember wasn't listening. She stood over Kate's wounded form, her body radiating protective fury. Any pirate who tried to approach was met with flames hot enough to melt anything. Ash appeared from the shadows next to Jake. The dragon's eyes were glowing, and darkness swirled around him like a living cloak. He looked at Kate, then at Jake, and something seemed to pass between them. The dragon moved to Kate's other side and placed one claw gently on her wound. The shadows that usually obeyed his command now flowed into the injury. Kate gasped as the bleeding stopped. The darkness was somehow sealing her wound, not healing it completely but keeping her alive. "Did he just do what I think he did?" Kate whispered, staring at Ash in wonder. Jake didn't have time to answer. More pirates were coming, and they had brought heavy weapons. One of them fired a rocket launcher directly at the group. Skyfire appeared in front of them, taking the blast on her ancient scales. It hurt her but didn't seriously injure her. The elder dragon turned to face the remaining pirates, and her voice echoed through the entire ship. "You dare attack Dragon Young? You dare threaten those under our protection? You will learn why our kind is feared across the galaxy." What happened next was brutal and swift. The dragon elders stopped holding back. They tore through the pirate forces like they were made of paper. Nightwing dragged the leader of the pirates from his hiding spot in the ship's cargo bay, holding him up with one massive claw. "Who sent you?" the elder demanded. The pirate laughed, blood dripping from his mouth. "You think we're the only ones? There are dozens of groups hunting your kind. Dragon parts are worth millions. Those hatchlings are worth even more alive. This isn't over. For you it is," Nightwing said coldly, and threw the man into a holding cell with such force he didn't get back up. The battle lasted only 20 minutes, but the damage was severe. The Horizon's Edge was barely functional. 2 crew members were dead. 5 more were seriously injured, and the ship's hull had been breached in multiple places. Jake sat in the medical bay hours later, watching Kate sleep. The doctors had stabilized her, but she would need weeks to recover. Around him, other injured crew members rested in beds. This was his fault. He had brought Ember and Ash onto his ship, and now people had died because of it. Ember and Ash lay on the floor next to him, exhausted from the battle. They were still pressed against his legs, but they were different now. In their eyes, Jake could see they understood what violence really meant. They had killed today. They were only 5 months old, and they had taken lives. Skyfire entered the medical bay, her enormous head barely fitting through the reinforced door. "The human hatchlings fought well," she said quietly. "Both of them showed courage and intelligence beyond their years. But they also showed something we did not expect." "What's that?" Jake asked tiredly. "They fought like you humans do, as a team. Dragons typically fight alone, each one a force unto themselves. But Ember and Ash coordinated their attacks. They covered each other's weaknesses. They adapted tactics in the middle of battle." The elder paused. "They learned this from watching you and your crew." Jake looked at his 2 sleeping dragons. "Is that bad?" "We don't know," Skyfire admitted. "It has never happened before. Dragons learning from another species, adopting their ways. Some of the elders think it is wrong, that you have corrupted them. But I watched them fight today. I saw how they protected the wounded, how they showed mercy to enemies who surrendered, how they worked together. These are not traditional dragon values, but perhaps they are not worse values, just different. The elder dragon looked at Kate sleeping in her bed. The dark hatchling saved her life using powers he should not have been able to access for years. He did it because he saw you cared for her, and he has learned from you that protecting your family is important. Tell me, human, is that corruption or evolution? Before Jake could answer, alarms blared again. But these were different alarms. Not battle alerts, but security warnings. The dragon elders called an emergency meeting in the station's largest chamber. Jake stood in the center with Ember and Ash on either side of him. Around them, dozens of holographic screens showed representatives from every major government in the galaxy. Everyone was talking at once, their voices creating a chaos of sound. "Order!" Skyfire roared, and the room fell silent. "We will discuss this matter calmly and rationally." A human representative from the United Earth Coalition spoke first. Her name was Victoria Hayes, and her face was cold with determination. "Those creatures," she pointed at Ember and Ash, "just destroyed a military-grade attack force. They're 5 months old. Imagine what they'll be capable of in a year. 5 years. They're too dangerous to be left under the control of one man." "They're not creatures," Jake said firmly. "They're intelligent beings. And they're not under my control. They're my family." "Family?" Victoria laughed bitterly. "Captain Morrison, you've created weapons that think they're human. Do you understand how dangerous that is? Dragons are supposed to be neutral, separate from galactic politics. But these two have bonded with humanity. What happens when there's a war? Will they fight for us? Against others?" An alien representative, a being made of crystal that refracted light in rainbow patterns, spoke next. "The human makes a point, though not the one she intends. If dragons can bond with other species, this opens new possibilities for cooperation and understanding. Or it opens the door for dragons to be weaponized." Another voice added. This one belonged to a reptilian species that looked vaguely dragon-like themselves. "If humans can tame dragons, others will try. We'll have arms races over who can control the most powerful dragons." Jake felt Ember and Ash pressing against his legs, trembling. They didn't understand all the words, but they understood they were being threatened. Nightwing stepped forward, his massive form casting shadows across the entire chamber. "Enough. The hatchlings are not weapons to be controlled or prizes to be claimed. They are young dragons who suffered terrible trauma and bonded with the being who saved them. This is natural, even if unusual." "Natural?" Victoria challenged. "Elder Nightwing, with respect, these dragons breathe fire hot enough to melt starship hulls. They can teleport through shadows. They killed 30 armed soldiers today without breaking a sweat. And they'll only get stronger. We can't have that kind of power loyal to one human." "Then what do you suggest?" Jake asked coldly. "That I abandon them? Give them to the council to be locked up and studied? Or maybe you'd prefer they be destroyed before they become too powerful?" The room erupted in arguments again. Some agreed with Victoria, saying the dragons were too dangerous. Others defended Jake's right to care for them. The crystal being suggested a compromise, where Ember and Ash would be monitored but allowed to stay with Jake. The reptilian representative demanded they be given to the dragon elders immediately. Through it all, Jake felt his anger growing. These people were talking about Ember and Ash like they were objects, problems to be solved. Nobody was asking what the dragons wanted. Nobody cared that they were just children who had already lost everything once. Finally, the oldest dragon elder, whose name was Ancient Flame, spoke. His voice was so deep and old it seemed to come from the bones of the universe itself. "There is a solution," he said. "The trials of the Guardian. We proposed them before, but Captain Morrison had not yet proven his worth. Now we have seen what his influence has created. Dragons who fight with honor. Dragons who protect the weak. Dragons who work together instead of alone. Perhaps this human has something to teach us just as we have something to teach his hatchlings." "And if he fails the trials?" Victoria demanded. "Then we will accept the council's judgment on what should happen to Ember and Ash," Ancient Flame replied. "But if he succeeds, you will accept him as their guardian and cease your attempts to separate them." The room fell silent. Everyone knew the trials were nearly impossible. Even dragons rarely passed them. A human had no chance. "When?" Jake asked simply. "Now," Ancient Flame said. "You wish to take them tomorrow, but events have moved faster than we planned. The trials begin in 1 hour." Jake looked down at Ember and Ash. They stared back at him with those intelligent eyes full of trust and fear. "Can they come with me?" Jake asked. "No," Nightwing said softly. "You must face the trials alone. That is the way it has always been. 1 hour later, Jake stood at the entrance to the trial grounds. It was a massive structure built by dragons thousands of years ago, made from black stone that seemed to absorb light. Ember and Ash had tried to follow him, but the elders had created a barrier of energy they couldn't cross. Jake could hear them calling for him, their cries echoing across the station. It tore at his heart, but he forced himself to keep walking forward. The first trial was fear. Jake stepped into a chamber where the walls seemed to disappear. Suddenly, he was floating in space alone with no ship and no suit. He couldn't breathe. He was dying. The panic was overwhelming. But then he remembered Ember and Ash's faces. If he died here, what would happen to them? The fear of failing them was stronger than the fear of death. Jake closed his eyes and pushed through the illusion. When he opened them again, he was standing in a new chamber. The second trial was strength. Giant stone warriors appeared, each one twice his size. They attacked without mercy. Jake had no weapons, no armor. He was just a human facing impossible odds. He fought anyway. Every time he was knocked down, he thought of Ember chirping happily when he fed her. Every time he wanted to give up, he thought of Ash curling around his shoulders. For them, he could do anything. The stone warriors eventually crumbled to dust. The third trial was wisdom. Jake found himself in a room with 3 doors. Above each door was a riddle in a language he didn't know. He couldn't read the words, couldn't understand the puzzle. But wisdom wasn't just about knowledge. It was about understanding. Jake thought about the dragon elders, about their ancient culture and values. He thought about how Ember and Ash had learned human ways but were still dragons at their core. The answer wasn't in choosing a door. The answer was in understanding that some problems don't have perfect solutions. You just have to make the best choice you can and live with it. Jake walked through the middle door and it opened. The fourth trial was sacrifice. In this chamber, Jake saw Ember and Ash trapped in cages. They were crying out for him. A voice echoed through the room, cold and emotionless. You can free them, but only by giving up your life. Or you can save yourself and leave them to their fate. Choose. Jake didn't even hesitate. He walked toward the cages, ready to give everything for them. But as he reached out to the bars, they vanished. It had been another illusion. You passed, the voice said. True love requires sacrifice. The final trial was the hardest. Jake entered a chamber that seemed to contain the entire universe. Stars swirled around him, planets formed and died. He felt impossibly small, insignificant. The voice spoke again. You are one human. Ember and Ash are 2 dragons. They will live for thousands of years. You will die in decades. They will outgrow you, outpower you, outlive you. What right do you have to claim them as yours? Jake felt the weight of those words. It was true. He was temporary. They were eternal. How could he possibly be a good father to beings so much greater than himself? Then he heard it. Faint but clear. Ember and Ash were calling for him through the barrier. They had been calling this entire time, refusing to give up on him. You're right, Jake said to the universe. I'm just a human. I'll die long before they do. I can't teach them everything they need to know. I'm small and weak and temporary. He paused, feeling tears on his face. But I love them. I'll love them for every day I have. I'll give them everything I can in whatever time we have together. Maybe that's not enough, but it's all I have to offer. The universe seemed to pause. Then the stars began to fade, replaced by the black stone walls of the chamber. Ancient Flame stood before him, his massive form filling the space. You have passed, the elder said simply. Not because you are strong or wise or fearless, but because you understand what it truly means to be a parent. To give everything knowing it will never be enough and to love anyway. The barrier fell. Ember and Ash came running, their claws scrambling on the stone floor. They crashed into Jake with enough force to knock him over. He lay on the ground, laughing and crying at the same time as 2 dragons covered him in licks and happy chirps. The dragon elders watched in silence. Skyfire leaned close to Nightwing and whispered, Perhaps we have been wrong about many things. Back in the chamber with all the representatives, Ancient Flame made his announcement. Captain Jake Morrison has passed the trials of the Guardian. He is recognized as the true parent of Ember and Ash, with all the rights and responsibilities that entails. Any who wish to separate them must challenge him directly, and they will answer to all dragons. Victoria Hayes looked furious, but she couldn't argue. The trials were ancient law, respected by all species. This isn't over, she said. Those dragons are still dangerous. All dragons are dangerous, Nightwing replied calmly. That is our nature. But these two are also loving, loyal, and brave. They learned those qualities from their human father. If that is corruption, then perhaps the galaxy needs more of it. 6 months had passed since the trials. Jake stood on the bridge of his new ship, the Starfire, and marveled at how much had changed. The old Horizon's Edge had been too damaged to repair, so the Dragon Elders had helped build something new. This vessel was designed specifically to accommodate 2 massive dragons and their human crew, because Ember and Ash were massive now. Each dragon was the size of a large building, with wingspans that could cover a small town. Ember's crimson scales gleamed like polished rubies, and heat shimmered around her constantly. Ash's black scales seemed to absorb light itself, making him look like a hole cut in reality. But despite their fearsome size and power, they were still the same loving dragons Jake had rescued. Right now, Ember had her enormous head resting on the observation deck, watching Jake through the reinforced windows. Ash was somewhere in the ship's shadow, invisible but definitely present. The Starfire was on a mission to explore a newly discovered system when the distress call came through. Kate, fully recovered from her injuries and now first officer, brought it to Jake's attention immediately. It's coming from a human colony on the edge of the system, she said, her face worried. They're under attack by pirates. The message says they have hostages and are demanding ransom. Jake didn't hesitate. Set course immediately. Maximum speed, Ember and Ash sensed the urgency. Both dragons moved to their positions on the exterior of the ship. They had learned to fly alongside the vessel, using their own power to help it move faster through space. Together, they could push the Starfire to speeds no normal ship could achieve. When they arrived at the colony, the situation was worse than expected. 3 pirate ships orbited the small settlement, their weapons trained on the buildings below. Jake could see through the scanners that the pirates had gathered all the colonists in the main square and were holding them at gunpoint. They want 5 million credits or they start killing people, Danny reported from the communication station. They gave the colony 1 hour. That was 40 minutes ago. We don't negotiate with pirates, Jake said firmly. Kate analyzed their positions. Ember, Ash, are you ready? Both dragons roared in response, a sound that shook the entire ship and probably terrified the pirates below. The plan was simple, but risky. Ember would create a ring of fire around the colony to cut off all escape routes. Ash would teleport inside the pirate stronghold and disable their communications. Jake and his team would move in during the confusion to free the hostages. Now, Jake ordered. Ember dove toward the planet like a falling star. Her scales glowed brighter and brighter until she looked like a second sun. When she reached the atmosphere, she opened her mouth and breathed out a continuous stream of fire. The flames formed a perfect circle around the colony, a wall of heat that nothing could pass through without being incinerated. The pirates panicked immediately. They had expected a negotiation or maybe a small rescue team. They had not expected an attack by a fully grown dragon. While the pirates were distracted by Ember's display, Ash made his move. He became one with the shadows and teleported directly into the main pirate building. Jake watched through the security cameras that Ash had remotely activated. The dragon moved through the corridors like smoke, appearing behind pirates and knocking them unconscious before they could react. Within minutes, all the pirates' communication systems were destroyed. They couldn't call for backup, couldn't coordinate with their ships in orbit, and couldn't trigger any of their explosive devices. Jake led the ground team down in a shuttle. They landed outside the firewall that Ember was maintaining. The heat was incredible even from a distance. Can you create a path through? Jake asked, touching his communication device that was linked to Ember. The dragon made a pleased rumbling sound and a section of the firewall parted like a curtain. Jake and his team ran through, feeling the heat on their skin but not burned. Inside the colony, they found the hostages exactly where the pirates had left them. The colonists were terrified but unharmed. The pirates guarding them were looking around in confusion, trying to understand where their communications had gone and why their leader wasn't responding. "Drop your weapons," Jake called out. "You're surrounded and outgunned. Your ships in orbit are dealing with a very angry dragon. Your only chance is to surrender now." One of the pirates laughed and pointed his weapon at a small child in the crowd. "You want to see what happens if we don't surrender?" Before Jake could respond, Ash materialized from the shadows directly behind the pirate. One massive claw gently but firmly removed the weapon from the man's hand. The pirate screamed and fell to his knees. "Good boy," Jake said with a smile. Ash made a pleased rumbling sound like a giant cat purring. The other pirates saw what happened and immediately threw down their weapons. Fighting humans was one thing. Fighting dragons was suicide. The hostages were freed quickly. The pirates were secured in their own holding cells. Above the planet, Ember had dealt with the pirate ships by melting their weapons systems without destroying the ships themselves. The pirates in orbit surrendered when they realized they were defenseless against a dragon who could breathe fire hot enough to vaporize their hulls. As the colony's mayor thanked Jake and his crew, a small girl approached. She couldn't have been more than 6 years old. She walked right up to Ember, who had landed nearby and was resting after her exertions. "Are you going to hurt us?" the girl asked in a tiny voice. Ember, who could have swallowed the child in one bite, carefully lowered her massive head until she was eye level with the girl. Then she made a soft chirping sound, the same sound she used to make when she was a hatchling seeking comfort from Jake. The girl's fear melted away. She reached out and touched Ember's snout. The dragon's scales were warm but not burning hot. Ember closed her eyes in pleasure at the gentle touch. "She's nice," the girl said, looking back at her parents. "The scary dragon is nice." Jake walked over and put his hand on Ember's scales. "She's not scary. She's family. And family protects people who can't protect themselves." More colonists came forward, hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence. They wanted to meet the dragons who had saved them. Ember and Ash were patient and gentle, letting children climb on their legs and adults take pictures. Jake watched with pride. These were the same dragons that Victoria Hayes had called too dangerous to exist. The same dragons that the Galactic Council had wanted to lock up and study. Here they were, being gentle and kind with strangers who had every reason to fear them. That night, after the celebration feast the grateful colonists had prepared, Jake sat under the stars with Ember and Ash. The dragons were too big now to fit inside any building, so they often slept outside. Jake had a small tent set up between them, where he felt safe and warm. "Do you two remember when you were small enough to fit in my jacket?" Jake asked, scratching Ash's scales. The dragon made a happy rumbling sound. Ember nudged Jake gently with her snout, careful not to knock him over despite her size. She remembered. They both remembered everything from those early days. Kate joined them, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Jake and sat down beside him. "I've been thinking about what Victoria said," Kate began, "about how dangerous Ember and Ash are. She was right about their power. They could destroy cities if they wanted to. But they don't want to," Jake said firmly. "I know. That's my point." Kate looked at the 2 dragons. "They have all this power, but they use it to protect people. They learned that from you. You saved them when you could have walked away. You fought for them when everyone said you shouldn't. And they learned that love is stronger than fear." Jake felt tears in his eyes. "I'm just trying to be a good father." "You are," Kate assured him. "You're the best father 2 dragons could ask for." Ember and Ash moved closer, wrapping themselves around Jake and Kate protectively. To anyone watching from a distance, it would have looked strange. 2 enormous dragons capable of destroying armies, cuddling with 2 tiny humans like they were precious treasures. But to Jake, it was the most natural thing in the world. The next morning, they received a message from the Galactic Council. It was an official recognition of Jake's work. The Council was creating a new position, called Guardian Ambassador, specifically for him. His job would be to travel the galaxy with Ember and Ash, helping people in need and showing everyone that humans and dragons could work together. "We're going to be heroes," Danny said excitedly when he heard the news. "We're going to be a family doing good work," Jake corrected him. "The hero stuff is just a bonus." Over the following months, Jake, Ember, and Ash became famous across the galaxy. They stopped pirate attacks, rescued trapped miners, helped settle disputes between warring factions, and even saved an entire planet from an asteroid collision. Ember used her fire to push the asteroid off course, while Ash teleported scientists to safety from the impact zone. But the most important work they did was quieter. They visited schools and showed children that different species could be friends. They talked to governments about cooperation and understanding. They proved that strength didn't have to mean violence and power didn't have to mean fear. Ember became a teacher, working with young dragons who had lost their parents in the poacher attacks. She showed them that healing from